So today's Star Wars Day, isn't it? Is that a big thing in the States?
They do love a good pun, don't they? May the 4th be with you.
Right, so tell us what they're doing for that.
I've no idea. I've no interest whatsoever.
Oh, well, that's very good. Apparently, this is a day for...
Just kidding.
Well, apparently it's a day for...
I imagine they'll be being hilarious about it.
Well, so obviously having lived there and down... Can you imagine down Hollywood Boulevard? They'll all be there. The Jedis will be there. You'll have Chewbacca there. You'll have Luke Skywalker. You'll have all the rest of it, won't you?
Yeah, Plump Spider-Man. All of the characters will be out.
And actually, it just does show the power of movies generally, doesn't it? The fact is, that film was in 1977. I was, what, very young.
Well, there's more than one.
No, I know, but the original was in 77. It's the only one worth watching, in my humble opinion, Caroline.
I saw a super cool picture of somebody's staircase, and they'd done above the staircase, you know, like the opening of Star Wars, like there were, and it was just as you walk down the stairs, obviously it kind of scrolled above your head. It's pretty cool.
Fantastic. Anyway. Right, let's talk about some serious news in the States and what's going on. These demonstrations in the universities have really hit the headlines around the world, actually. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so these were mostly students, some faculty and staff, but protesters at universities started in Colombia who wanted the universities to review their investments in Israel in light of what's going on in the Middle East. And that escalated to being encampments on the universities. And this week, what happened was it kind of flared up. There was one big one, particularly here on the West Coast at UCLA, with an encampment. And then on Thursday, the police moved in, the cops moved in overnight. They sort of move in to disorientate them in the middle of the night. We've got these kind of, they call them like flashbangs. It's a big, noisy, explosive, but not harmful device, just to kind of disorientate and wake them up and stir them up. And then they arrested the protesters that were there after a bit of a skirmish, nothing too violent, but a little bit of a skirmish. Put them in zip ties and shipped them off downtown and set about dismantling the encampments that were there at UCLA. And that is a scene that has been seen at other universities across the US as well.
Well, just in terms of this, we, as you rightly said, it started at Columbia. We then saw it spreading to various other universities in the United States. And they started with a peaceful demonstration and pitching tents and saying, look, we need to review companies doing business in Israel or Israeli organisation in general, because they say they're complicit in the war in Gaza. But it's soon turned actually really pretty ugly. We've got scenes of students wearing masks, covering their faces, actually becoming quite violent. And it looks like the law enforcement there, and they're normally very heavy-handed, they didn't really know how to react to begin with.
I think they're very conscious of how these kind of scenes have played out in the past. I mean, you think back to the 60s of the Vietnam War protests and what they've perhaps learned from that. But also here in LA, we had protests in LA in 2020, of course, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. So the cops there sort of stood back more, and they did stand back. But there were some scenes where it did sort of escalate between the opposite sides of the argument on Wednesday night. And it seemed after that, the police will only go in after the universities say, yes, we want it cleared. But there was a kind of effort to not escalate it too much. But, I mean, obviously it was very tense. And like you said, on some of these campuses, it was peaceful. At UCLA, there was a lot of graffiti on buildings. You know, you're talking about quite beautiful buildings. So graffiti on the buildings and other sort of defacing of the buildings. But to the main part, when even, you know, sort of under arrest, the protesters, by the time they got to the point of arrest, were sort of sat there in zip ties, sort of waiting to be processed and waiting for the next stage. But, I mean, it is a very tense situation. It certainly could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot more aggressive going in. So, it's a difficult one to navigate, isn't it?
It is, and of course the President, Joe Biden, has denounced the violence associated with these pro-Palestinian demonstrations on the campuses, saying that whilst, and this is a really key point, whilst peaceful protests are protected in terms of speech, lawlessness will not be protected, and I think that is exactly the right argument.
Yes, he is walking a difficult line politically because in an election year, he's very conscious of walking this line of trying to give people the right to exercise their right to protest. Some of the protesters obviously took offence at what he said. And some supporters of Joe Biden were, you know, pleased by what he said. It's you know, it depends which side of the fence you sit on with what was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he made a valid point. They have, you know, those universities are still having to teach remotely.
Yeah.
They're just in the last few weeks. But if you paid thousands of dollars and thousands of dollars for your loved one to go to one of these universities, you'll probably want them to be attending in person.
Well, quite right, and well said. Let's talk about bird flu. This is extraordinary. Bird flu likely circulated in US dairy cows on a limited basis for 4 months before federal officials confirmed the disease. That's now spread to 9 states.
Yeah, and it's spreading rapidly. So it's the H5N1 virus. I know you're up on your viruses, pair of doctors. The joy I feel in my soul when I have to do a medical story to you two.
Sorry,
can't tell you.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so bird flu basically spreading to cows, spreading to dairy cows. And what they think is that it's in the milking device. I guess the cows have not been masking. And they are spreading it in the milking devices through dairy. And obviously, the concern from scientists, the fear is, will it spread from person to person? There is a case in Texas of it spreading to a person, somebody who had close contact with dairy cows, and that person was mildly unwell. But their big concern is, of course, will this mutate? Will this spread human to human? Because that's of greater concern.
Exactly. The USDA has says it believes wild birds carrying the H5N1 to the cattle. The outbreak then expanded as the cows were then shipped to other states. I think that what that shows is how quickly these viruses can spread because of the way that we transport cattle or indeed any other livestock around various countries.
Well, yeah, I mean, what are you going to do? Sort of say this cow can't go to the next state. You're just talking about, you know, a drive. So it's hard to contain, and also hard to, until they figure out how it's being spread and in what way it's being spread. But I mean, they're in quite close proximity to each other, so it no doubt will spread very rapidly. The concern is, well, okay, that's one thing amongst amongst dairy cows, milked pasteurised. You're not so worried about the product, but will it spread then and mutate and go from person to person?
I think there are bigger issues also. Why did they know about this 4 months before anyone was actually alerted? I think that's a big problem in terms of surveillance, because there are whole centres there which are there to detect variants like this.
Listen, if we did a programme about the American food industry, I could rant on about the state of it for quite some time.
Well, and of course, then that was the backbone of the deal, wasn't it, between the US and the UK about chlorinated chicken as well. Let's just finally talk about an alligator. But it's a special kind of alligator, and he's gone missing.
He hasn't gone missing. He's gone back to his lake.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some people have cats, some people have dogs, maybe even a budgerigar that makes you feel good.
Yes.
And the craze, I guess, of emotional support animals, where they get a little red jacket and they are there for emotional support.
And they're allowed to go on planes.
And they can go on aeroplanes, but they can't go to
They
ball
can go
games.
on aeroplanes. Right.
Yeah, it's sort of part of the thing.
So hang on a minute. So someone had an alligator as an emotional support?
So somebody had an alligator called Walligator as his emotional support alligator. He would walk it on a leash, and he first hit the headlines because he tried to take it to a baseball game. And I said, look, we'd rather you didn't bring your emotional support alligator to the baseball.
Fair enough.
Thank you all the same. But he said, well, he's very friendly. Listen to this. You can put your head in his mouth. How'd you find that out? And you can rub his tongue. I mean, that would not emotionally support me. That would emotionally traumatise me, but each to their own.
So he says, Joey Henney says that Walligator has helped relieve his depression. Why? Because he's so pleased he's alive by rubbing his tongue and sticking his head in his mouth.
To be fair, hearing about it has slightly relieved my depression.
So basically...
Anyway, poor old Walligator got taken and went missing, and then they think that basically he was taken by some pranksters, but then released into the wild.
Well, he was on holiday. Walligator was on holiday, apparently.
It's deeper than that. So the pranksters dumped Wally into somebody else's garden, apparently to scare them. They called the local county. Apparently, Caroline, you can do that if you have an alligator in your garden. And they came and they rounded up Wally.
Right.
And they released him back to the wild where there were other alligators in a lake. So he's now been reunited with his kith and kin.
What about Joey?
Whether or not, the sad thing about this is Wally's been domesticated, whether or not he'll be able to survive.
Or he'll get eaten.
I don't know. If he's not into biting people, I don't know how that alligator's going to get by.
No, well, quite. And it's just... So they were basically looking for this alligator for a long time. But obviously, what happens to the emotional support if you lose your alligator? How do you get another one?
Maybe get a bunny?
Yeah, get a bunny.
Maybe, or just like a lizard or something. Something smaller.
Well, a smaller, like an alligator, just smaller.
Or a cat.
Just smaller, go in your pocket. Nobody would know if it was a baseball.
Great. All the big stories, Caroline. Thanks ever so much.
You're welcome, as ever.
Yeah, Caroline, really good to see you. Caroline Faraday there, broadcaster and journalist. That was today's Transatlantic Talk.